Good morning, everyone. My name is Anna Péceli. I'm a senior fellow at the Center for Global Security Research at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. Welcome to today's lecture on mapping IAEA verification tools to AI governance. Before I introduce our speaker, a quick reminder of the rules of engagement. Our speaker will talk for about 30 to 45 minutes. This part of the lecture will be recorded and later uploaded on the CGSR website. The second part of the Q&A is the Q&A session that is off the record to encourage a more frank conversation. You can ask your question either by raising your hand and Katie Thomas will unmute you, or you can type your question in the chat function and I will read it for our speaker. Please make sure that you send your question to all panelists so that I can actually see those questions. And with that, we are thrilled to welcome Christina Krawec today. She is an international security professional specializing in nuclear non-proliferation, safeguards, AI policy, and space. She is the founder of EarthNote LLC, an independent consulting company that provides open source and satellite imagery analytical expertise. Previously, Christina worked at the International Atomic Energy Agency, the US Department of Defense, Google, and various other research-focused organizations. Christina holds a master's degree in non-proliferation and international security from King's College London and a bachelor's degree in international relations and music from Stanford University. Christina, thank you so much for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me today. I will go ahead and start by sharing my screen and make sure that that is all squared away. Okay, can you see? Can you confirm that you can see this?
Yes,
okay.
It all looks good.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Well, I am so grateful to be here today with CGSR and LLNL. As Anna so gracefully said, I am here as an independent researcher. I own my own company, EarthNote, which provides open source research, satellite imagery analysis, and subject matter expertise in the fields of nuclear non-proliferation, geospatial intelligence, and AI policy. And as someone who has been straddling both the nuclear non-proliferation and AI safety worlds, I have been very fortunate to work on projects and research that bridge both of these very important and ever-developing fields. This research in particular was hosted and supported by the IAEA AI Fellowship, which is a research fellowship focusing on AI safety and policy out of Cambridge in the UK. And last summer, as a nuclear non-proliferation professional, I was accepted to this summer research program to conduct research on how IAEA verification tools could be applied to the AI governance sphere. So my main question was, what are the lessons that we can learn from nuclear safeguards and nuclear safeguards methodologies and tools? There has been a lot of discussion in the AI field about how to govern AI as a tool, a technology, and a catalyst for dual use capabilities. So even Demis Hassabis, who is the CEO of Google DeepMind, has discussed how AI can be overseen from a multilateral level. And he has had this, there have been discussions of an IAEA for AI, in quotes, of the development of an international organization that could oversee the development of AI models, hardware, etc. And so as someone who used to work for the International Atomic Energy Agency on the open source team, I thought it would be particularly useful to provide my experience and my familiarity with the IAEA to the AI policy community, because as there has been a lot of discussion of how do we create an IAEA for AI, I hadn't seen a lot of input from former IAEA employees themselves. So I wanted to contribute my field and my experience to this question. So the way that this talk will work is I will go through sort of how I'll do a very brief overview of IAEA tools, and then I'm going to, because I am sure that many of you are already aware of sort of the ins and outs of how the IAEA functions, but I'll do a little bit of an introduction to that, and then I'll discuss how I applied IAEA analytical methodologies to potential analogs for AI governance. As you are all very aware, the IAEA is the United Nations nuclear watchdog responsible for monitoring the nuclear programs of all countries worldwide. The IAEA is responsible for conducting state assessments, state evaluations to determine that countries are adhering to their international nuclear safeguards obligations and aren't illicitly developing nuclear weapons. And the way that these state evaluations are conducted are through three main sources of information. The first is state-provided information. So the IAEA and member states adhere to agreements that they have made between each other, and the state is required to provide the IAEA with certain types of information. Some of the information is required, some of it is voluntary, but in general, the first category of information that the IAEA uses to assess state nuclear programs is information that the state provides itself. The second category of information is information from safeguards activities. And these are, within this category is the information that the IAEA goes out and collects itself from activities such as inspections. So if an inspector is at a facility and collecting information, that is the information from safeguards activities category. Then there is a third kind of miscellaneous category of data collection, which is other relevant information. And this is databases that are IAEA specific. This is open source information and also information that states can provide about other states. So we have three main information sources that the IAEA uses for conducting state evaluations. And I had not seen in discussions of AI governance anybody discussing sort of the ins and outs and more of the granular ways that the IAEA actually conducts state evaluations. I had seen discussions on, okay, how do we develop an IAEA for AI on an institutional level? How would we develop a UN body, a UN organization that can oversee the development of AI? But that was sort of at a higher level, sort of bureaucratic level. And I hadn't seen anyone actually look at the analytical tools that the IAEA uses to conduct state evaluations. And I hadn't seen anybody really discuss these more detailed, granular methodologies and how they could be applied to a potential international verification regime for AI. So this research does not argue for or against an IAEA for AI, but rather it discusses the specific tools and the specific methodologies that the IAEA uses and provides AI analogs and also sees whether or not these specific tools could be used to verify AI development, whether that is on a model level or whether it is on a more hardware-focused level. For example, monitoring AI chip flow, imports, exports, or developing or monitoring the development of AI hyperscale data centers, which power AI infrastructure. So what I did for this research is I collected and listed every IAEA verification tool that I could find. And this was done using various sources that are all available to the public. The IAEA glossary, for example, goes into detail on how different tools can be used to make state assessments of their nuclear programs. I developed this massive spreadsheet that listed 24 of these tools within the 3 categories that I mentioned earlier. I discussed each of the specifications of these tools. So I looked at, okay, like this is one tool, this is how it functions, this is the context in which it functions, and then this is how it could be applied to the AI sphere rather than the nuclear sphere. So I mapped each tool to an AI analog, and then I assessed each tool for feasibility in the AI sphere. So the factors that I used to assess each tool were A, technical feasibility. So would it be actually technically feasible to apply this verification tool to AI? Institutional feasibility, what are sort of the bureaucratic and institutional requirements that would need to exist in order for this tool to be used in an AI verification context? Political feasibility, what is the motivation for either states or companies or organizations to integrate this tool as a part of their verification toolkit? And temporal feasibility, how soon, what is the timeline that would be needed in order to integrate this tool for the use and for the use of AI, for the use in AI verification. So the results here, okay, great, the video is working, is just this massive spreadsheet that outlines each information stream, so state provided information, IAEA collected information, and other information, such as open sources. It outlined each verification tool, its process, its description. And I don't expect anybody to actually read this, but if you'd like to access the huge spreadsheet in on your own time, or even right now, you can feel free to scan that QR code and it'll lead you directly to the spreadsheet where you can also see what options there are. Basically, you can see all 24, 25 verification tools that I outlined as a part of this research and all the notes that I've taken to actually determine whether or not these tools are applicable to an AI context. And the results that I have listed on this slide are just one slice of all the different types of applicability that could be integrated for the IAEA tools being used in an AI context. And I think what I will use the next few minutes to really talk a little bit more about what different tools I listed and what they actually mean in both a nuclear and AI context. So I'm going to go kind of off script, off the lists of this screen. But basically, for the purposes of my research, I listed 3 different IAEA verification tools that had high, medium, and low feasibility based on the 4 requirements that I ended up using. And these are just, these are not the strongest IAEA verification tools that could be used in an AI context, but I chose 3 that were quite different from one another to show that there is a very diverse range of applicability from the nuclear field for AI governance. And so I think what I will start with, I'll do a slight side note and say that this talk today is actually coming on the heels of a presentation that I made of this research last week in Paris at UNESCO. The International Association for Safe and Ethical AI hosted its second annual symposium at UNESCO in Paris, and I was an invited speaker to present this research there. And I had a really interesting set of conversations with people who listened to my presentation at the event. And these are all people who are deep in the AI field. These are people who are either machine learning experts, technical experts, or they are sort of developing AI policy and AI governance experts who are all interested in ensuring that the development of AI is done in an ethical and safe way. And it was really a gratifying experience to be at this conference last week because I was able to be kind of the bridge between the nuclear and AI fields, where people were coming up to me saying, I have never even heard of the IAEA. Can you tell me what it is? Or what does it actually mean for the IAEA to conduct state evaluations? And why does that matter? And what relationship does the IAEA have to the UN, to the UN Security Council, et cetera? So I was working as a nuclear person within a bunch of communities that are more AI focused. And it was really interesting to see how I could educate this sort of AI ethics and safety field with a lot of information that I have started to take for granted as somebody who worked at the IAEA. You start to think about these concepts of safeguards and think that most people are aware of at least like what the IAEA is and how it functions and the whole thing. So it was really good to be able to bridge that gap between the AI fields and the nuclear fields. I digress a little bit, but what I'll say now is that people had a really wide range of inputs and opinions about what could actually be used, what tools could actually be used from a nuclear context in an AI context. And in general, what I had determined seemed to be on track with the feedback that I was getting, where a lot of the lower feasibility tools are the tools that are either not technically applicable to AI. So for example, environmental sampling. That's something that an IAEA inspector will go take a literal physical swipe of a facility during a visit to determine any presence of fissile or radioactive material. That's not going to be relevant to an AI context. There's no chemical composition or chemical worry about any of those kinds of materials being used in AI data centers, for example. So those kinds of tools were already going to be low feasibility. But other tools were lower feasibility because they require the buy-in of states or the AI frontier model developers. So for example, in this slide, the physical inventory listing is a method of states reporting a complete list of all nuclear material at a facility. And a potential AI analog could be hardware inventory reports. So instead of PILs, HILs. So model developers could report lists of chips, host CPUs, servers, motherboards, etc., all of the hardware that is in use at a data center for a centralized verification body to review. However, that requires the existence of a formal centralized verification body and also requires the buy-in and the consent of a model developer to actually submit the reports. There's not really any kind of motivation for developers to even share this proprietary information. So tools like this, I thought were low feasibility, either because there's no political motivation, so there's no political feasibility, and there's no institutional feasibility, meaning that there's no actual they would require the establishment of the IAEA for AI in order for the tool to actually be implemented. Then the tools that fell in the sort of mid-range level were the tools that could be implemented, that there might be a motivation for a model developer to have some buy-in, but it doesn't seem like this would happen necessarily right away. So for example, the voluntary reporting scheme for the IAEA, states will voluntarily declare information such as trade data, the results of research and development activities, or will provide expanded inspector access. And this is a sign of goodwill from a state who state is interested and invested in ensuring that the IAEA has the easiest time possible conducting its evaluation of the country's nuclear program. So they voluntarily, as a sign of goodwill, will allow more information flow, more communication, more inspections, etc. Right now, even since the writing of this initial research, the landscape for AI development and the sharing of AI relevant model milestones and information has changed a lot. Right now, AI developers will publish system cards, which will go over a model's capabilities and some of the specifications that go into the thought process behind a model's, like, for example, update. And this is a company's own form of voluntarily reporting information. So to continue this, there could be an AI analog in which model developers choose to publicly declare additional information on a more regular basis. So this could also be compute usage summaries, which would allow people to understand a little bit more about the amount of hardware being used, the energy being used for an AI model, red teaming, so results of testing the actual model itself, and announcements of third-party audits if that is happening for a model. So basically expanding the patterns and norms of voluntary reporting could be a potential AI analog to the IAEA's voluntary reporting scheme. And I rated this as mid-level feasibility because with the existence of model system cards, there already is some precedent for a model or a company voluntarily declaring information. However, it seems like the amount of information that a company requires, or that a company is declaring, kind of changes week to week, depending on its perception of international competition or other competition with other companies. And there isn't a strong norm for transparency at the moment, or it could be stronger. So the mid-tier tools were those that might have feasibility or might have the beginnings of short-term feasibility at the moment and may not require the existence of a formal international verification body for AI, but are still in sort of in its beginnings and may not be able to be integrated immediately. The verification tools that I rated to be the highest feasibility in the shortest term were those that fell under the third category that I mentioned earlier, those that use the source, those that use open source information. So within that third information stream that I discussed earlier, one of the main sources of information is open source information. So this is anything that is publicly available, either freely or for purchase. The IAEA uses open source information as one part of its verification and uses open source information to correlate and confirm that information that has been declared to the IAEA and information that has been collected by the IAEA seems consistent with what is out there in the world. And the open source team at the IAEA uses all different types of open source information to do this. So this includes the reading, analysis, and processing of R&D publications, social media posts, news reports, independent analytical reports, journal articles, R&D, so any kind of publicly available data. This also includes the use of import and export trade data and also commercial satellite imagery. So basically anything available to the public is one part of the type of information that the IAEA processes and uses for state evaluation. And I determined that the use of open source information is the category, the information stream that has the highest feasibility within the AI sphere. Within AI governance, a lot of organizations, think tanks, independent AI safety researchers, etc., are already using open source information to get more data on how models are being developed and represented and published. And I think that because there is a precedent of using open source information, there is even more opportunity for the AI safety community to use the types of tools that the IAEA does. So, for example, the IAEA has an internally developed database called the Open Source Information System, or OSIS. And this is an internally developed tool that automatically scrapes the internet for open source information related to nuclear safeguards topics. It goes out and collects news reports, journal articles, social media posts, independent analytical publications, and collects it to this main centralized database, tags it by country, by state of the nuclear fuel cycle, by relevance. And this centralized system allows the open source researchers to then have access to all the same information and keep or discard information that is or is not relevant to nuclear safeguards. I posit that developing an OSIS for AI could be a feasible and tractable next step to providing AI safety researchers more insights into AI development. And what this database would do is be a database, an internal or a publicly available system that collects and displays news reports, government publications, journal articles, etc., for relating specifically to model development and deployment, potentially the economic flow of AI chips and other AI-related hardware, or the development of hyperscale or even just regular scale data center facilities. So having a centralized repository of AI-focused open source information that is available to the public would be a way to centralize and make more consistent research that AI safety professionals could do to work together and acquire more information about how models are being developed and released. This is just one source of one IAEA tool within the open source category that could be used in an AI context. For example, commercial open source satellite imagery could be used to track the expansion, development, and activity that is ongoing at data center facilities. And this is actually the topic of my current recent research, where I looked at how electro-optical commercial satellite imagery can be used to track the footprint of data centers, specifically big hyperscale data centers. And then trade data, anything available to the public regarding the import and export activities that are ongoing for AI hardware, could also be a way for researchers and states and international organizations to derive more information about the current status of AI development. And the reason why the overall open source category is of such high feasibility is because it does not require the buy-in or the cooperation necessarily of large frontier AI developers. It can be the use of open source information, and the collection of it can just be used in an independent context, and anybody can, with the right tools, access and analyze it. So it doesn't require the cooperation, for any formal cooperation, to be had by states / AI model developers, and also institutionally, it doesn't require the creation of an IAEA for AI in order to be integrated to the study of AI development. And on a more practical level, the development of an OSIS for AI could be done by even one think tank that is willing to devote the time and resources to maintaining this type of database. So if I know that that OSIS was not developed by a large team, and it does require ongoing maintenance and updates. OSIS is updated twice a day, and with the latest and most relevant articles of safeguards interest. So there would have to be a buy-in from an organization that is willing to actually create this tool. But it is feasible. I don't have exact financial numbers on what it would take to develop an OSIS for AI, but it seems like it would be possible, or it could be done using with not just one independent think tank, but for example, a collection of think tanks working together, or within an existing international organization like OECD. So this could be developed as a tool within existing infrastructure and wouldn't require the development of a brand new IAEA for AI or a brand new organization to oversee the development of AI. So I've just talked through these 3 tools, and there are so many more that I would love to discuss in this moment, because I have my list of 24 tools that had different levels of feasibility. And I'm actually really interested in continuing this research and going into further detail on which other tools could or would not be applicable to the AI governance sphere. And because this specific research, it was only a 2-month research fellowship. So I was only able to do 8 weeks worth of research in this time, but I'm really interested in continuing this this research and going into even more detail on the different IAEA tools, because there is so much there still to discover. But at the moment, my recommendations for the AI safety community and the AI verification community in general is look at what it would take to create an OSIS for AI and see what kind of resources would actually be needed in order to do that. And specifically, and in addition, expand AI voluntary declaration norms based on the voluntary reporting schemes. So continue dialogues and soft communication to develop an atmosphere that is conducive to higher levels of transparency within AI model developer contexts. And in general, so those are like my tool-specific recommendations. And then in general, using the IAEA's three-pronged information stream model, I think is a really good way of looking at how to have different sources of information all supporting and corroborating one another. Because a source of information that is reported by a state is verified by an inspection, is verified by open source information. So all of these three categories of information work with one another. And in discussions of developing later on a potential IAEA for AI, using this three information stream model could be a good way of developing an analytical program that is accurate and conducive to efficient information gathering and assessments. And in addition, working towards the establishment of multilateral AI verification research is, I think, a great way forward. This is sort of the precursor to developing an IAEA for AI. How can we work together with different countries and with different international organizations to develop verification standards and rules and expectations whenever an IAEA for AI may or may not be developed. So I will go ahead and open the floor to questions now.